In order to get elected, you need to promise good things for the people who potentially will vote for you. You need to promise that the economy is going to get better, that everybody's going to be happier and have a little bit more money. However, then the economic realities kick in, as perhaps the current government is noticing that, okay, yes, there's some things that we can do, but there's no magic button. There's no a cure-all for our economic woes. Joining me on the program now from Maxim Institute, Thomas Scrimgeour. Thomas, kia ora. Good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Oh, g'day, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
It is a bit pesky, isn't it? Because you can have this brilliant political ideology about how you want to help the people and serve the people, and you want the people to be happy and live happily ever after and all those fairy tale type things. But then pesky things like, I don't know, maths, reality, economics, human nature, all of those things kick in, and it's not such a fairy tale after all.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, governments always find that there's always more good causes, more things that they could be doing to help people than they really have the ability to do.
Yeah.
It's kind of this sticky problem where someone will always be able to come to you with a pitch. Hey, we could help out this way. And so governments always have to then make this difficult decision, trade-offs, what are we going to prioritize? Because they can't do everything.
And when it comes to, I suppose, the impact that government policy has on things like inflation and interest rates and all of those sorts of things, by now we should have figured out the unintended consequences of government spending lots of money and how it impacts the good folk at home. But those chickens coming home to roost a bit at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the good news is that the most recent economic data is saying that inflation is coming down. That target range is 1% to 3%, and it was about 3.3, I think, in the most recent figures. So we're kind of on the way back to finding a sense of normalcy and not having these kind of constant rises in costs. But it's been a bit of a hard road to get here. I mean, anyone who's borrowing, typically mortgages, will be feeling the sting of that. And then also unemployment has been ticking up as well. So the road to get back to stable money is not an easy one. Certainly hopefully some first signs of some easier times ahead.
I mean, that's optimistic, and we salute your optimism in that regard. It is going to be a tough return to normality, because the thing is, and I've certainly noticed this with my own economics, that if you spend up large, if you live an opulent lifestyle and money is no problem, you get used to that. And then suddenly, in tougher economic times, you need to cut your cloth accordingly. Governments that cut programs, governments that spend less money on bread and circuses, say, tend to be less popular. But I mean, that's the reality that we face. We're in tougher times, perhaps, than we used to be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always much easier for a government to add a new program than it is to remove one. Now, obviously, during the pandemic, the government increased its spending quite significantly, and for good reason. There was a lot of it was a crisis, and money needed to be spent in various ways. But actually, most of that spending has not been rolled back. The size of the government budget now is significantly larger than it was pre-COVID. And this new government hasn't made major steps in reducing the size of it. And so even in the most recent budget, there was a lot of noise made about it, as if it was sort of a rolling back of the size of government spending. But the current government is running a larger deficit than Grant Robertson had planned to be running. So they haven't really cut back as much as they liked to act like they had.
Significant job cuts within the civil service. I mean, it'd be pretty tough looking for work in Wellington at the moment, I imagine, especially with economic pressure on employment levels.
Yeah, so obviously very, very tough for those people who lost their jobs. And you never want to trivialize that experience for them. In terms of significant, I think perhaps the size of the cuts was overstated when balanced against the significant increase in hires that had happened over the 6 years prior. The current government has not rolled the size of or the number of employees in the government back to 2017 levels when they were last in power. There are significantly more public servants still. But yeah, obviously it's a tough climate to lose your job in, because unemployment figures are rising across the board, not just in the size of the public sector. So yeah, uneasy roads for those people.
Talk to us about, I suppose, some of the principles involved in the economics of all of this, because this is the essentially what's happening here. There are economic trade-offs at the moment, and honestly, there's just not enough resources. There's just not enough finances to create economic stimulus without driving inflation even higher.
Yeah, so I think there are kind of two ideas that I think are really helpful to carry around with you when thinking about government policy and government spending. The first basic little idea is that prices are information, that when prices of specific things rise, it's not arbitrary. Over the past few years, we've had our grocery bills go up much higher.
Yep.
That doesn't come from nowhere, and it's not even because the supermarkets are greedy. For the 10 years prior to our inflation going up and our grocery bills getting more expensive, the supermarkets were still greedy, but the prices weren't going up. And so we have to say, why did the prices go up? There are underlying material factors that drive that.
There's the war in Ukraine. There's problems with import-export markets. There's a once in 100-year storm which destroys all the crops in Hawke's Bay. All of these add up. Generally, they all complicate the issue.
Exactly. And so what that means is that if we're wanting to get our grocery bills more manageable, we have to think about solving material problems. We couldn't just say grocery bills need to be lower and expect that a decree could solve that problem. And then the second kind of idea that's worth carrying around, that's a little bit more hard to really latch onto, is that money, the value of money in the abstract, represents trust. Trust in the economic system writ large.
Yep.
So we kind of had this inflation, this cost of living crisis everything was getting more expensive. And the Reserve Bank has to kind of raise interest rates, and then it imposes economic costs, but it gets a hold of that inflation and brings it down. And that's really important, because if people can't trust the money they are exchanging with one another, that imposes real costs on them as well. Now, some people sometimes talk about government budgets as if they're like household budgets. And that's not really a helpful way of thinking about things. I get an income each week and I can spend out of that income. The government issues the currency, so the rules are slightly different for them. They can borrow more than I can. They have a bunch of different opportunities. But the government still faces constraints. It can't simply spend everything it would want to. They can't spend beyond the ability. They can't spend to the point that the economy writ large loses trust in its currency.
One of the other complicating factors, of course, facing the current government is that pesky coalition thing, MMP, and different political parties that have different priorities, different economic outlooks, different promises that they made in their manifestos. Somehow, even keeping those three political parties happy brings its own economic stresses and strains.
Yeah, very much so, especially when the parties have different visions about what they'd like to be spending money on or what they'd like to cut. Though sometimes it is helpful having a range of different parties there. Pre-election, the National Party had budgeted for some money being raised on a tax on foreign buyers.
Yeah.
And the criticism was that actually they weren't going to raise as much money as they said they would. Now, come coalition governments, and New Zealand First didn't like that policy at all. And so National was able to quietly bury that financial policy that perhaps hadn't been budgeted quite correctly.
Might not have worked anyway.
The blame as, we gave it up because our friends didn't want it, and we're being, compromising. So sometimes that give and take really helps, as well as it's a bit of a challenge.
But I mean, hey, given that political parties need to face the fact that they're not our saviours, they're not going to be able to say the magic words, wave the wand, and bring us back to times of prosperity, I suppose as we work through this at a slower pace, not necessarily at an instant pace, grocery prices are coming down. As you say, inflation seems to be getting under control. It's not a magic wand, but maybe it's a golden path. We're heading in the right direction, do you think?
Yeah, I think the medium-term signals are hopeful. I'm not here promising that everyone will be experiencing that equally, and certainly it's not going to be an overnight fix, but I'd say there is a light at the end of the economic tunnel.
Hey, appreciate your wisdom and insight on this. An article on the topic is going to be posted on the Maxim website a little bit later this week, maxim.org.nz. Thomas, thanks for what you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.